First, for those who have not met me, I am Heidi Casper. I am the director here for Austin Energy Green Building. So welcome and thank you for coming. We have a great lineup of speakers here today, but we're going to be covering best practices for designing and maintaining your landscapes and buildings. If you didn't know, Central Texas has one of the highest concentrations of properties at risk for wildfire. And as we continue to develop and expand out into our wildland-urban areas, that risk continues to grow. So that's part of the reason we are doing this seminar here today, so we can learn what we can do to mitigate that and reduce that risk. The speakers are going to be sharing their expertise and real-world examples.
This morning's lineup, we got David Bock, my partner over at Wildfire Division. We have Kari, Hines. We have Daniel Cavazos. We have Beth, Culver, and Andrew Tig like tiger, I was told. And that's the first half of today. We're going to get right to it with Dave Bock. Dave currently leads the Fire Resilient Landscape section of the Wildfire Division at the Austin Fire Department as Senior Wildfire Mitigation Specialist. He's an ISA certified arborist and certified erosion, sediment, and stormwater inspector. He has a history in national disaster response, emergency management, resource coordination, and wildland firefighting. In the years of forestry, risk mitigation, and habitat-related conservation experience, he has worked in collaboration with the Bureau of Land Management, the United States Forest Service, FEMA, TEDM, and many local municipalities and nonprofits to improve the survivability and recoverability of wildfire and other natural disasters. Please welcome Dave Bock.
Thanks, Cody. Wow, that intro, like the speed at which you read that, like made it seem way longer than I thought. Yeah. Yeah. Appreciate it. Well, hey everybody. My name is David Bock. As Cody introduced, I'm here to hopefully just take us back to maybe elementary school science class and give you all a bit of an intro on how fire works. But more specifically, my hope is to get you to understand a little bit more about what we consider when we're looking at fire behavior, fire activity in the wildland sense, as it approaches that wildland-urban interface, or what we like to say is WUI. So I'm just going to kind of work you through some of the steps here, the way we look at fire behavior, some of the categories that we use to identify its behavior, and some of the good and some of the bad things with wildland fire. So hopefully we'll be able to understand how vegetation, weather, topography, and fuels interact and influence each other during fire behavior or during a wildfire. Hopefully we're going to identify the purpose and various types of common vegetation treatment practices, determine how those things are going to interact with each other. All right, so we're going to kind of cover some history of wildfire in the Austin area. We're going to work on how the fire environment works. That's a term we'll cover in a little bit here. And we're going to talk about fuel characteristics. So fuel is not just vegetation or the forest. Fuel can also be structures. It can be fences, all sorts of things like that. So fuel is anything that can burn. We're going to talk about topography, how slopes and grades and things like that can affect fire behavior. The weather is a big one, and just general fire behavior types as well. All right, so it's commonly referred to as a fire regime. That's the combination of frequency, predictability, intensity, seasonability, whatever word you want to use, how often fire comes and how intense that is kind of that term there. So in Central Texas, it's not super well documented. Out west, they have a lot of large diameter trees that they can look at the tree rings and see, when was there a fire this year, that year, things like that. We don't have that same type of historical documentation in Central Texas. Not a lot of our trees are around as long. So it's a little bit trickier to identify the long-term history, though we do have some other methods and things like that. There's certain invasive species and native birds that have adapted to certain plants that have evolved with fire. So that's some of the things that we can kind of look at there. So there was a lot of fire suppression since the beginning of the 20th century with wildfires, before we learned that was creating a problem with a buildup of fuel and vegetation. So we have since kind of learned our lesson there. But yeah, so I want to show you this little slide here. So actually, why don't we just zoom it in so you can see a little better there. So this is 2011. How many of you here were around for 2011 in Austin area? Okay, so I'd imagine a decent amount of you remember the Bastrop fires that we had out there. The fires that we could potentially see, and all these dots that you're seeing, this is all just 2011. These are ignitions that started in Travis County in 2011. It was a very unique year. We were at the end of a very long drought. We hadn't had rain since Christmas, and we had made it all the way to the summer. And so the conditions were all present for high likelihood of wildfire. The fuel that we have in this area and just west of Austin and Travis County is a lot different than the piney forest of those Bastrop fires. So a lot of people, when they're talking about the history of fire in Central Texas, they can't help but bring up that Bastrop fire in 2011. But the thing I want to point out is that the fuel loading that we have here, the frequency and likelihood of that kind of fire is not quite the same. But it is a unique risk that we do have, and that's kind of why we have started talking about these things here, and why we have sort of enhanced awareness of wildfire risk in the general area. So, and this is not the same looking map, but gives you an idea. This is 23, 24. So we have a decent amount of ignitions that are happening across the county. This is certainly less than 2011, but these ignitions are happening. They just don't make the news every day. So, all right. So, just want to go through a little bit of a history here. So, we did have all of these are in 2011. These fires I'm going to cover. So, we had the Ciner Ranch fire that was 125 acres. 35 homes were lost, and that was on that same time frame in 2011 as all of these here. Okay. We got the Pinnacle fire that was out near sort of Oak Hill. This one's kind of interesting. Kind of want to show you here. So it's 100 acres, 12 homes damaged, 10 homes lost. Not the relative losses versus this like 100 acre fire, right? Versus you get these tens of thousands of acre fires out west. The difference there is we've got these pockets in Austin, Travis County of green space that are these 100 acre or sometimes even 50 acre green spaces that are right up against homes and structures and things like that. And so that's where most of our concern comes from, is these rapid small fires that are happening so quickly that suppression efforts are struggling to keep up. And then we had one kind of recently. So on Palmer Lane, there was one in 2023. It's only 37 acres, and it was able to almost completely destroy this apartment complex, and there was damage to several of the other apartment complexes near there. Two different housing developments were impacted here. I don't know if you can see in the back there, there's all those houses that were kind of tucked behind, and then we've got the apartment complexes up front there. Those houses had embers falling on them, but luckily those were constructed in a newer time and with practices that made them slightly more ember resistant to ignition. So it's just a fun thing to point out with that fire there. We're going to cover kind of a lot more of that in a little bit here. All right, so let's talk about actual fire. So there's sort of the fire triangle, which I think in, I don't know, 5th grade biology class or science class, you were maybe learning about what makes fire. Does anybody remember what those things are? We've got fuel, we've got oxygen, and we've got heat or a spark, right? Those are the ones that you're normally talking about when you're learning about how fire works. When we're talking about the fire environment, it's often referred to as a triangle as well, and that's a little bit different. So those 3 elements are fuel, topography, and weather. So those are the 3 characteristics we're really paying attention to when we're trying to determine what wildfire is going to be doing and the likelihood of fire and things like that. So we're going to cover those topics real quick here. All right, so when you're thinking about the fuel, you're thinking about what type of fuel do we have, how is this fuel arranged, as well as how dense is this fuel. So we call that fuel loading. And then on a regular basis, you're also looking at what's the moisture level of that fuel. So fuel is anything burnable, any burnable material, wildland fuel, live or dead plant material, man-made fuel, which would be houses, sheds, cars, fences, all that stuff. So knowing the types of fuels in the area, historic and current, and how fire might behave adjacent to you is the best way to understand like how fire is going to behave near you. And I'm going to cover some specifics on some of this in a second here. So this slide is getting really into the weeds here, but just to give you an idea, as we start to dive down into how stuff burns, we've got these fuel classes. So this 1 hour, 10 hour, 100 hour, 1,000 hour fuels is a little bit into the weeds, but this is kind of how like a fire behavior specialist is going to be looking at the fuel that could potentially burn. And so the idea here is you're talking about like a surface to mass ratio or surface to volume ratio. So if you think about this hour timeline is a way to characterize something that will burn based on how fast it dries out. So that's what that 1 hour, 10 hour, 1,000 hour is about. Is how fast is this going to dry out and become available for ignition. And I want to repeat that term, available for ignition. That should really be a theme of what you're thinking about when thinking about wildfire defense or fire defense is how available is this fuel to burn. And there's a lot of things that influence something's availability to burn. All right, so I like to use this this example here. So we've got campfire, right? Everybody's at least seen someone build a campfire, right? Okay. So if you think about it, you need the kindling at the bottom, you need the newspaper, you need the smaller sticks, you need then the larger sticks, and then the smaller logs, then the bigger logs, right? You need that progression of fuel to get the whole fire burning. If you take out some of those steps, that's going to eliminate the possibility of this fire starting to burn these larger logs and having a large fire. So I just wanted to get you started with that so that we can kind of work our way up to how we evaluate a landscape and how wildfire works like that. So a lot of that involves preheating, right? So when the flame is near the next thing that it's gonna catch on that ladder of working its way to a larger fire, that those flame, the radiant heat, the flames, and all of that is preheating that fuel and making it available. Something won't burn until it reaches its ignition point, right? So you've got that larger stick or that log that is sitting there right next to getting ready and getting warmed up and preheated so that it becomes available for ignition. So, and that's kind of, I guess I got ahead of myself here, so I just explained this whole slide here. So, before fuel can burn, it needs to be dried out. It needs to be preheated. And that circles back to why we look at these fuels, and the type are categorized by how they dry out. So moisture in a fuel is influenced by a lot of things. With a live vegetation and a living tree or plant, that is often based on precipitation, but also the temperature and the wind and the heat and all of that stuff. So all of these things kind of come into play. If you're talking about something that's not alive and is maybe a dead tree that's nailed to the side of your house, it's more influenced just by the heat and how that piece of material was treated, or where it is, or if it's in the sun or not, all these types of things. Okay. So I do want you to kind of look at this here when we're thinking about the environment here. We got 4 different pictures on the screen there, and it's a large variety. So the thing that I want to point out here is when we're worried about catastrophic fire that is extreme enough to become a hazard. Not all fire is bad. There's a term in the industry with wildland fire called beneficial fire. And accepting like the inevitability of fire is part of the reality of the world that we're in, right? So once you do that, you can kind of get over the sort of Hollywood fear of fire coming for you, and you understand that it's if you can anticipate the way that it will be and understand how it might behave, you can be more prepared for it when it comes. So the reason I say all of that is to get you to kind of understand like this concept of fuel loading versus availability and things like that. So in the upper left, you've got these sort of younger green trees, and to the right, you've got that same thing, but those trees are all now dried out, right? So it's the same loading of fuel, but you've got less availability with the green living trees, more availability with the dried out ones, right, in the same scene. On the bottom, you've got the inverse. You've got a high fuel load where there's higher biomass sort of showing up in that picture, but it's all dry. And then, so it's just something to think about where you might have more intensity with dry and available versus heavy load and wet vegetation. All right. All right, so now we're looking at like the fuel arrangements. So some of the things we think about is lateral continuity. So kind of what I've got showing on the screen here is a slight disconnect in lateral continuity in that vegetation. And that's something we look at, like how is fire going to travel laterally across a landscape? And is it a mosaic of vegetation, or is it just a contiguous type of the same vegetation? Or is it transitioning from different types of vegetation from a grassland to a forested area and things like that? And how will fire react when it approaches and transitions from a grassland into a forested area? It all depends on what type of vegetation we have and things like that. It all depends on the weather as well, but we'll get to that in a second. So then we have vertical arrangement. So this is where we're working our way up from ground fuels, surface fuels. Then we've got understory, ladder fuels, aerial fuels as we work our way up from the ground. And so that's kind of something that we're thinking about when we're looking at how fire might transition from, say, being on the ground to what we call full canopy fire or a crown fire, which is quite a bit more catastrophic than something on the ground, which you're going to kind of learn about here. So I got a fun little diagram here that kind of talks about the ways that fire can move around in an environment like this. So we've got all these sort of ground fuels and ways that it can work its way up. You've got an open canopy. I don't know if you guys can kind of see that depiction of embers falling down through this open canopy on the right-hand side there. And they're igniting these flashy grass fuels that are at the bottom, and then now those flashy fuels can work their way over through those mid-level fuels and climb up to the tops of the trees. And we've got slightly more catastrophic fire than, say, something like this, where you've got an elimination of those ladder fuels, or maybe the ecosystem naturally created a lack of those climbing fuels and things like that. So just kind of a comparison of when you've got intense fire versus slightly less intense fire. Just for reference, this is the one we don't like. This is the one we're a little more okay with. in case that wasn't clear. And primarily the reason I can even dive deeper on that, like, so this one here, where we've got like crown fire and things like that, you've got enough convective heat and enough vegetation that is combusting and breaking down to where you've got embers that are being driven up into the air by that convection. And then if you've got enough lateral wind, those embers are pushing themselves all over the place. And that's why about 90% of homes in a wildfire event are ignited by embers versus the 10% likelihood that you're going to be having structures ignited from direct flame impingement or radiant heat, which we'll cover in a sec here. So let's jump into weather. How does that affect wildfire? So this is probably one of the biggest influencers and something that we watch because we luckily have a lot of observations of the weather and can sometimes predict the weather even if we're lucky. So I'm going to jump into kind of how relative humidity kind of affects the availability of fuel. So relative humidity is probably the biggest one next to wind. I'd say when we have these high wind events, I don't know if you all remember back in March, we had a few red flag days and the really gusty winds, and we had a significant amount of wildfire starts from that because wind pushes oxygen through those fuels and burns things very quickly, and it can move things across the landscape very quickly. And the main reason that's scary is it's hard to catch when we want to get out there. So in this relative humidity thing, come with me on this very bizarre journey where I'm going to use a goofy analogy, and I hope you all follow it. So it's my attempt to explain how relative humidity works and how and why it's so important with drying out the fuel and making it available or not. So imagine an egg crate, okay? Right now it's empty, and the eggs are like water molecules, right? These water molecules are in the fuel, in this grass. That's why it's green and moist and all that stuff. We should probably give this egg crate some wings so it can move around in the air, right? So the egg crate is just an air molecule, right? You've got eggs that are water. You've got the egg crate that is an air molecule floating around, right? As it's blowing across this grass and bumping into it, it's picking up some eggs, right? So now imagine that your egg crate is full of eggs. You're full of water molecules. You got a full load. You can't really take any more passengers, and you're bumping into this grass. So you're not picking up as many eggs when you bump into the grass. So this scenario that I've got on the screen is a high relative humidity, okay? So when we've got those low relative humidity days, that moisture is getting sucked out of this fuel much faster than it would be if it had a full bus of water molecules. It's kind of goofy, right? That's the way I think of it. So hopefully that's the way all of you think of it now. But when we have these events with very low humidity and high winds, you've got a rapid drying and curing of these grasses and even some of the more heavier fuels that take longer to dry out, and they become available for ignition a lot faster. So coming into wind here. So wind is the most critical weather element when you're looking at fire behavior, especially when you're thinking about spread and activity and things like that. So it pushes the wind around, it gives it more oxygen, and it dictates the direction of the flame front spread. Okay. So one thing I want to point out here is that large amounts of precipitation with weather. I think a lot of people get excited when rain comes down and they're like, okay, good, we don't have to worry about wildfire for a while. That's not necessarily the case. It really all depends on the overnight recovery and the ability of that vegetation to absorb moisture. One heavy rain event isn't necessarily going to raise your fuel moisture level to the point where you don't have to think about wildfire anymore. So just to kind of help show all of these things together, you've got fuel load over on the left with high fire intensity, And then you've got relative humidity as well as like fuel moisture on the right. So as some of these things go down, your fire intensity increases. As some of these things go up, your fire intensity decreases. So these are just kind of the three elements that we really look at that give us our fuel availability and what we expect with fire intensity. With topography, fire moves uphill faster than it goes downhill. So every roughly 10 degrees of slope, fire speed doubles. And that's because you've got preheating. The heat from the flames below, or heat rises and is starting to preheat that fire or those fuels uphill a bit. Some other things we look at is aspect. So if it's a south-facing slope or a north-facing slope, that means it's probably particularly based in our location in this hemisphere. The southern-facing slope happens to get more sunlight. And so that will cure and dry out some of that vegetation. Will also influence what that vegetation looks like regularly and what kind of growth patterns it has over several years as well. All right, I'm talking ahead of my slides here. So you can see here, there's more vegetation on the right side of that slope versus the left side due to its aspect, sunlight exposure, things like that. All right, so real quick, I want to run through the types of fire that we have. So we've got like a smoldering fire, which is just kind of this smoldering. You don't really see flames or anything like that, but it can creep and start to creep, which is actually, we're going out of order here. So this one's called torching. This is where you have like one tree or one group of vegetation that is going up and igniting. You've got that crown fire, but you don't have a full consumption of that. This is the scary one. So this is what we call a crown fire. This is where you've got full consumption all the way up to the canopy of the trees. And this is the one that's producing those embers that we're worried about. And this is the one that we're not really putting out this fire. This is the one where we're kind of getting out of the way and working on life safety and property preservation, but this is the one we're not really getting in front of. All right, so this one we call a running fire. This is where you've got some flames. You've got the understory is usually burning. This one's typically somewhat manageable at a certain point. There's the creeping fire that I was thinking about earlier. So this is where you got like the really low flames, small grasses, things like that. This is often what it looks like when we're doing prescribed fire. And then this one's real fun. We call this spotting. So this is when an ember has been sort of flung ahead of the flame front, and you've got a spot fire that is outside of the main perimeter of a wildfire. And this is also the number one way that structures ignite. It's also often the way that a fire advances in a certain direction because the wind is pushing these embers over. So the ways that these not only structures but other fuels can ignite from a fire. I've kind of said this before. So we have direct flame exposure. So that's when you've got flames that are right up against that other vegetation or a structure that's causing that ignition. Then we've got radiant exposure. So maybe the flame isn't making contact, but there's enough heat that fuel reaches its ignition point and just ignites from heat. You don't need to have flame contact for ignition. And then we've got ember production and spotting. So the fire could be nowhere near the structure or other fuel that's going, but embers can, some case studies from other wildfires, embers have traveled over 1.5 miles from their source. So it can be quite interesting how far, and seeing those reports on how far spot fires were happening. So I do want to point out the concept of ladder fuel here a little bit more, just to drive that home for you. On the left, we've got the capacity for fire to travel up to the top of this canopy, and then on the right-hand side, we've got a lack of ladder fuels, and there's space there for a ground fire to pass through without transferring to the canopy of the forest. So I got just a couple neat little pictures of some stuff here. So I already said all of the things on this slide. Look at that. So here's some fun pictures I thought I'd throw in here of embers coming off of some things. Nice little time lapse photos, kind of neat. That's my favorite one. These are some pictures from the Palisades recently. So we had some of our folks deploy out to the LA area after the Palisades Fire, and I just wanted to point this out. So on the left there, you've got a piece of yard furniture, lawn furniture, patio furniture, whatever you want to call it. And it's just, you can see all these holes from these embers that were cast on this whole community, that were the cause of a lot of the ignitions of these structures from the Palisades Fire. The interesting one on the right there, you can see you've got a structure that was somewhat saved, and the way that they did that was pulling that vegetation. You can see it started to catch the edge of the roof on fire, and they were able to cut that out and prevent that from happening. All right, so this is how it's going to happen. And this is unique to the Austin area. The big things we're looking at when we're in a high drought situation, which is making the soil and the fuel moisture go down, which is making the vegetation more available to burn. When we've got high wind days, that's going to be driving a lot of that fuel moisture out because the exposure to those molecules is very high as the wind is passing through. We've got high temps. That's going to also dry things out. And it's, I was talking about ignition temperature, the availability for something to ignite. On a high heat day where it's 110, you're part of the way there versus 60 degrees. That fuel is much less. So when you've got the combination of all of these things being an extreme level, I just want you to think about kind of the sort of response capacity that the city of Austin has. So we have 54 pumping apparatus, or fire trucks that can spray water. And it usually takes 4 of those to respond to a structure fire and put that fire out quickly enough so that it doesn't spread to other structures next to it, so other homes. Once you get structure-to-structure ignitions, we call that a conflagration, and that becomes very difficult to control. And so if you imagine these events like a 2011 high heat, high wind kind of day, and you've got several ignitions happening at the same time, soon our operations become overwhelmed, and it becomes difficult to have 4 apparatus at one structure. So you kind of do the math. The resources spread out thin, and we switched from putting out fires to life safety, right? So just kind of want to point out the math there. Just for reference, 54 pumping apparatus is actually pretty high for a municipality of the size of Austin. So don't worry, we're not behind the standard there. So we've got just a quick review of the types of fuels that we have in the Austin area. So sparse dry climate grass, this ignites easily, dries out easily, burns really fast. This is what we would call a grading juniper. So this is where you've got that patchy, bushy looking juniper, or some people call it cedar. And then this stuff can burn pretty easily. It's generally mixed with those easily ignitable grasses. And then we've got closed juniper woodland. So this is actually where you've got the more mature juniper trees. They're actually creating shade on the ground. And you have a closed canopy, which keeps that fuel moisture high, and which also keeps the soil moisture high. And so this fuel type is what we have a lot of in the Balcones Canyonland Preserve and in sort of West Austin, and it is the thing that a lot of people are afraid of when it comes to wildfire if they don't know any better. But this fuel type is actually pretty resistant to fire, except for some really extreme days where we have that low humidity, high wind, high temp type situation. And then we have like kind of a mixture of juniper and hardwood. That's where you got oaks mixed into the forest. Same concept, but you get a little bit more ground litter, so you may have higher probability for a ground fire there. All right, so ash juniper myths. Want to point out for y'all while I have you. So everybody thinks junipers are hazardous, that they're invasive. Everybody thinks that they are very prone to fire. Some people say it's like gasoline-soaked rag on a stick in the woods, and it's not that. There are times when you reach certain fuel moistures and wind and temperatures where it does become a risk, but in general, so that's only about 6% of the year where we're at that level. And this is sort of how we determine that. So every couple of weeks, we do fuel moisture sampling. So we'll go out, we'll cut off a piece of the vegetation, we'll take it and measure the amount of moisture that's in that wood to determine how this fuel might burn. And so we categorize that. So this is just like a little chart here to kind of show how we look at those things. Once you get into these lower, less than 80% fuel moisture is when we start getting into scary fire behavior. Mostly ash juniper is the one we're looking at there, because that's a sort of an indicator species of fire behavior, and it's the most common fuel type that we have here. So I do want to encourage you all to kind of find ways to identify risk in an area that you're looking at. There is a tool on the atxwildfirehub.com that you can look at wildfire risk, and you can zoom in on an area, figure out sort of like what's going on with the fuels around you, and identify certain risk levels of that area. But I think that's about it for me. So I'm going to pass it back off to our MC over there, and I'll be ready for questions later.
Great. Thanks, Dave. All right, let's see here. Here it is. Okay, next up, thanks, man. Our next contestant, Kari Hines. Some of you may know Kari. If you don't, get to know her. John Lovitz, anybody? No? Okay. Kari Hines currently serves the state of Texas as the Fire Adapted Communities Program Coordinator for Texas A&M Forest Service. After graduating with a Bachelor of Science in Forestry from Northern Arizona University, she joined the agency as an inventory forester and subsequently worked in the Wildfire Mitigation and Prevention Department for 11 years. First as a mitigation field specialist and team lead, and then as the state Firewise coordinator before her current role. Kari holds multiple National Wildfire Coordinating Group qualifications, including Complex Public Information Officer, Incident Commander Type 5, and Wildland Firefighter Type 1. Additionally, she holds Certified Arborist credentials through ISA. Kari is the creator and lead instructor for the ISA Wildfire Risk Reduction Qualification course, which emphasizes her desire to balance community wildfire preparedness with natural resource sustainability. Give it up for Kari Hines.
How we doing? Doing all right? Fabulous. I'm going to see if this works. Fabulous. No, that's forward. That's back. All right. I was super excited when I saw David was going ahead of me talking about wildfire basics, because that's exactly how we do it in the ISA class as well. Arborists come into that class and they say, we want to learn how to protect our clients' homes and structures from wildfire. And we give them about 3 hours of wildfire physics and wildfire behavior and history. And it's basically the compression of like a 4-day class into 3 hours. So their brains are really mushy afterwards. So you guys just got part of that in a half an hour. And now we're going to go to what in the class would be the next like day and a half. And we're going to talk for a half an hour about protecting structures in particular from wildfire. David set us up. If we understand some of the basics of how fire historically has burned in our ecosystems, that gives us a better understanding of how we can construct and landscape structures that we would like to protect, which I think is probably all of them, right? Critical infrastructure from daycares to schools to individual homes to historic buildings, whatever it is, from wildfire. I keep going the wrong way. Apologies. If nothing else, read this slide and then you can just zone out for the next 28 minutes. So the basics of wildfire risk reduction. 1, we're looking at making property accessible to first responders and preferably making a house number visible. That's not necessarily maybe for wildfire, but it gives us a really, really good starting point. So, because if you do not have a structure that is accessible to wildland firefighters, that means you're not getting wildland firefighters, because nobody in the field is going to say, oh yes, that house that you can't see that has vegetation all the way up to the edge that we can do absolutely nothing to protect it from wildfire. Yeah, let me just send my crew of 3 people with 500 gallons of water down there real quick. Not going to happen, right? If nothing else, we need a property that by itself is set up to defend itself just a little bit. We need communities, members who are ready to think about wildfire or just emergency response. We're trying to get people into this mindset that bad things can happen. It's nothing that we enjoy talking about, but if we take some first steps to plan ahead, we can be a little bit more prepared in case of a wildfire. We have a Firewise site out near Horseshoe Bay. They're one of our original Firewise sites in the state of Texas. They built in wildfire preparedness to the creation of their community, and they had a resident leader that talked about wildfire preparedness every single day for like 13 years. Guess what happened year 14? A wildfire, and the entire community had to evacuate, and not a single home was damaged. And on the way out of the community, one of the residents looked at their resident leader and said, this is what you've been telling us that we should think about for the last 13 years. And guess what? I don't have an evacuation kit ready. Sure wish I did. That's number 2. Number 3 is learning about prevention. What are the things that are causing fires in our community? Sometimes it's things that we are doing as construction industry, landscape industry, utility industry, but more often than not, it's just things that just are dumb. Just dumb things that happen that are complete accidents. And if we can change that, we can do a better job at not even having the fire to start with. The bottom is what I'm going to spend most of my time talking about today. That's fire-resistant landscaping and fire-resistant home construction. Notice I'm not saying resilient. I am not saying fire-resilient land work. That is a phrase that you will sometimes hear, especially when it comes to large green space management, because we've done a really, really good job of screwing up our natural ecosystem for the last 150 years. And we are looking at creating resilient landscapes. But when I'm talking about that first 100 feet around a home, I want a landscape that is resistant to wildfire. So there's a difference there. And then fire-resistant home construction. This is usually where I spend most of my time, but I was told today I get to talk about mostly landscaping, so that's where we're going to spend a lot of time today. All right. He said it. Pop quiz time. This was not planned. What do you think is the main threat to homes from wildfire? High five. Embers. You guys know that one. What about this one? Main goals for fire-resistant landscaping. Fire-resistant landscaping. What do I want out of my landscaping around homes? Distance from things that are burning more intensely. A perimeter, maybe, in some cases. Getting rid of dead vegetation. Okay, and what about main goals for fire-resistant construction? What do I want out of the construction of a building? Are you answering the questions as the expert in the room? Oh, okay, I thought that was Cody. I was like, Cody, low combustibility, so something that isn't going to start on fire very easily. What else? What's that first bullet? A building that does not catch embers as easily, right? We can't completely get rid of it, but we can try our best. So embers, we're going to, so I thought they were all going to appear at once, but apparently I did do it the way I wanted to, where they appear slowly. So fire-resistant landscaping, I want to keep the fire as slow moving and as low to the ground as possible. We already heard it here. When we're talking about vertical and horizontal continuity of the landscape. We can look at those things ecosystem-wide, but I'm absolutely looking at them on individual properties. Main goals for fire-resistant and reduce receptive fuel beds for embers. And you guys said it. Main goals for fire-resistant construction. I want to reduce the possibility of ember intrusion, so where embers are actually entering structures. I want to reduce the possibility of places where flames can meet other flammable material on and around the home. And I want to reduce the large amounts of radiant heat, specifically in front of windows. You saw the picture earlier of Palmer Lane fire. Are they going to look at that more later? Did I hear or no? So there's a story map created by yours truly online. It's called Palmer Lane Story Map. That's all you have to do. You'll find a lot about specifically why I was on that fire. I was there about till 3 o'clock in the morning on the first day. And I knew we were coming back that next morning to downed homes. We were pretty positive of it. And guess what? We came back the next morning and none of the homes in that townhome community were on the ground. And we said, why did that happen? We don't have codes here. We don't have ordinances that say they have to landscape and build a certain way. So there's a whole dang case study. I'm not a research scientist, but it's there. You can find that online. But the only... besides ember intrusion into the attics, the only major damage was a cracked window, and it was less than 5 feet away of fully consuming juniper. I could stand private property on one hand and the building with my other hand, and there was fully consuming juniper and a single outside pane of a window cracked. All right. It's like we know this stuff or something. So here are the ways, you've already heard it, that structures are damaged or destroyed. If we know how structures are damaged or destroyed, science tells us that we should be able to do something to decrease the chance of structures being damaged or destroyed, right? We got radiant heat, where you don't have to have physical contact. We have embers, and we have flame impingement. You already saw some good pictures of that. Who here in this room has seen this graphic before? Fabulous. This is nothing new. This is the sort of stuff that is being preached all across the country. The concept is also not new. We went to the wildfire, the Capcog Wildfire Symposium a couple weeks ago, and Glenn, who works for your fire marshal's office, pulled out a document from like 1984, and it's like, it is well established that the first 100 feet around a home are the most important for protecting it from structures. I wasn't even born yet, and we knew this stuff, right? This is nothing new. However, it does have a new name recently. You'll still see some publications that call it the home ignition zone. Nationally, we're kind of going over to the phrase structure ignition zone. This is just in recognition that it's more than just homes that we want to protect from wildfire, right? It starts, the most important part, and that's why it's in red, is the structure itself and the first 5 feet around it. Some of your older publications are going to say the first 30 feet around it. The zones shrunk in 2017. This was because of further research that companies like Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, IBHS, are doing that really, really show what wildland firefighters have known for a very long time, and that it's the structure itself and the first 5 feet around it that make the biggest difference as to whether or not that structure is going to survive a wildfire. Little counterintuitive to how most of us think, but there's no arguing it anymore. We know it. Firsthand accounts, research, it all agrees. So 0 to 5 feet, and the structure itself is what's called the immediate zone. We have the intermediate zone, which is 5 feet to 30 feet, and then you have the extended zone that is 30 feet, maybe to about out 100. Some documents will say 150, some will say 200. It's just out to the extent of managed area around the property. All right, so I told you it starts with the structure itself. Where are structures vulnerable to embers? Does anybody want to take a guess as to what some of these numbers represent? Raise a hands, and then I'll repeat it for the camera. What number are we seeing, do we think? 10 maybe? I would agree. 10 could be soffit vents, right? So the underside of the eaves, how those are constructed, and what sort of pathways for airflow exist. Is that even when homes are made out of fiber cement board, sometimes those soffits will still be a wood material. Sometimes you'll actually have a venting material in there. Sometimes you just have little holes poked. What else? There's a whole bunch of numbers on there. Yep. So we have number 6, and that's debris on the roof. Suggestion was maybe even your gutters, your valleys, any sort of debris on the roof. If you have a roof that's in good quality construction, fairly low chance that just having leaf debris burning on the roof is going to be what does you in. But why even have the opportunity to have flame on top of your structure, right? Don't need it there. Let's get one more for me. 19 is right there. So we have firewood, which I don't know how many other natural resource professionals there are in the room, but I absolutely adore when people take old dead wood that they're cutting up and then stack it right on top of the critical root zone, attracting wood-eating bugs on top of root zones and trunks. Anybody else? Is that just me? Yeah, right? So we have a stack of firewood near other material, including a wooden fence there. Now, I work for the Forest Service. If I come out here and say, we shouldn't use wood product ever, I think I'd have an issue with some of the people that my agency supports. Wood can be used. It is often the most economical. It's a renewable resource. It supports green jobs. We know it's important, but there are absolutely ways to modify wooden features on landscapes to make them less at risk. And you can come to my 2-day class to learn more about that because we don't have time. All right, but I'm here to talk about fire-resistant landscaping mostly, choosing the right plant for the right place. When I'm talking to arborists, this is something that's, already a baked-in concept. Can we please stop planting bald cypress right underneath power lines? Can we please stop planting cottonwoods on top of septic systems, right? Little things like that are already a concept we're thinking of. When it comes to fire-resistant landscaping, I'm looking at choosing the right plant for the right place. Right about now, when I'm doing public presentations, is usually when somebody in the audience raises their hand and says, hey, can you give me a list of plants that I can use in my landscape, please? Please give me a list that I can take to the nursery and say, give me these. And I could, there are lists that exist, I just don't like them. So I'm going to ask the audience here, why do you think placement and maintenance of vegetation in your property is more important than just choosing the right one? Think about it for a second. We have the distance. Distance can play a very large impact or play a large role in when the fire either enters through surface fire or has embers land on it, where that piece of vegetation is from things that could burn. That will absolutely play a role. Or we'll go back to David's concept, continuity, right? If you have more horizontal distance. Yes. So setting the plant up for success so it lives. A healthier plant is a more fire-resilient plant. We heard about fuel moisture. Thanks, David. If a plant has a higher amount of moisture inside of it, it is going to automatically be harder to ignite because all of that moisture has to be literally boiled out of the plant before the organic material can consume. Anything else? Let's get another one. Do we have different ecosystems in the state of Texas? I know we're here in Austin, but even in Austin, do we have different ecosystem types? Do you have different soil types? Do you have different placements in the landscape, whether it's on the top of the hill or the bottom of a drainage, near the Colorado River, further away from the Colorado River? Just a list of plants might not be what's appropriate for your specific job site, right? I always have a go-to story. Me, the person who's supposed to probably have like the house that's best prepared for wildfire in the state of Texas. I live in the Bastrop County burn scar. We bought a house that had just been rebuilt, and they had put Texas sage directly in front of the banisters of the house. And actually, I think yep. So looking at this list of characteristics of what makes a more or less fire resilient plant. So you have things like lower flammability. It only holds on to your green leaves. It has thick, fleshy leaves or stems. Usually they're broad-leafed plants. Usually they produce not a lot of dead material, and if they do, they're not going to hang on to it. They're going to get rid of it so it can be cleaned out. You're going to have open growth forms. You're going to have low levels of volatiles, oils, and resins. You're going to have just a generally high moisture content plant. Now, Texas sage, for those of you who are familiar with it, which side of the chart does Texas sage fall on? The right side. Texas sage has oils and volatiles, creates a ton of dead material, has very dense canopy, has it is a thick leaf, but it's kind of just a drier plant, right? So I have these plants. They've been planted for me. It would be a pain in the butt for me to have to go get those plants out, especially now that they're 4 feet tall. But guess what? They're in a watered landscape bed. I prune up the lowest level of limbs, mostly because there's some really good dewberry vines underneath them. And my dewberry vines, I have to be able to go in and reach the dewberries. I got 4 pints of dewberries this spring, guys, just off of the vines underneath my Texas sage, right? I have values to that landscaping bed that do not include removing the Texas sage because it's a great native species. It's a pollinator habitat. I can see it from my kitchen window, and so I can see the buzzing bees all over it when it flowers, right? That plant is on the right side of the chart, but I am managing it in a way that, for me, matches my risk tolerance. And every single person that you're working for, whether it's if you're public government or whether you're a private construction or you're a landscaper, whatever it is, they're going to have different values for their property and different risk tolerances. So for me, I'm pruning it, I'm limbing it up, I'm cleaning out the dead material underneath it, and it's in a watered landscape bed. And to me, that Texas sage is worth more where it is than the pain that it would be if I had to go take it out. Now, if that Texas sage was never watered and never pruned and never raked underneath and right up next to a whole bunch of dry grasses that never get weed-eated, and it's next to a wooden patio with plants right in front of a window, do you think it changes the relationship of the plant with the structure that we're trying to protect? We're mostly awake and nodding our heads. Yes, it absolutely does. So I much prefer to look at placement and maintenance of a plant than just having the right one. Now, this does not apply if you live in California because you have to follow certain rules about plants, but we're not in California. All right, so things like lantana, things like Turk's cap, fabulous, fabulous options. High flammability plants, things like yaupon, Italian cypress. But the pictures that I've used there, you'll notice this is not the picture that I thought I had here. In another presentation, I have a picture of a yaupon pressed right up next to a house, but it's very much being pruned like a topiary. So there's no limbs, like within 2.5 feet of the ground. It's just a nice kind of round bulb. And then these Italian cypress here, they're up against a wooden fence, yes, but you have a managed landscape lawn on one side, and you have rock in the bottom. How are those Italian cypress going to catch on fire? The fence. It could be the fence. If the fence was already on fire, sure. But those look like they just got put there, yeah? You think they're taking them out? Those aren't getting taken out. What can we do to help mitigate the risk, decrease the risk of those being there? Because at this point in time, we do live in a city with rules, though, but I don't know what those rules are. You guys are going to hear about them later. Then I'm sticking around for that conversation because you have a WUI code, the only city in the state of Texas. Oh, there it is. See, I told you it existed. I knew it was there somewhere. You can't see it very well, but it's there. All right. So what are some other ways that we can keep fire as slow moving and low to the ground as possible? What was this over here? She looked at the slide and gave me an answer. She's awake, guys. Gold star. Thanks. Mulching material. Using non-flammable material in the landscape. Is this something that we're already doing? It very much is. Can we be maybe a little bit more thoughtful about it and how it's used and maybe complement vegetation, proximity to structure? Yes, we can. It doesn't just have to be rock. See, I'm from the desert originally, and we used crushed glass, but it's like a landscaping glass. Like the edges have been sanded off of it. Has anybody else seen? I don't see it in Central Texas very often, so people look at me like I'm nuts when I say used crushed glass in your landscape. They're like, why would we do that? It's really pretty. It's used in desert environments all the time. What about how we maintain the vegetation that's already on that landscape? So here we have ash juniper. We heard a fabulous soapbox presentation that's very similar to mine about how juniper are not oil-soaked rags stuck on a matchstick, ready to ignite at a drop of a hat. Do they ignite? when they're available, they sure do, and they produce a lot of embers, but majority of the time, they're not available to burn. And if we can just create small separations between, let's say here, the surface fuels, the grass that would be burning, and the crown, just a little bit of separation there, you can massively make a difference as to whether or not those juniper are going to ignite or not. Fire doesn't stick around and burn in one place for hours at a time. A quick flashy fuel like grass, it's going to sweep through there and be gone in less than 30 seconds. You have to have enough heat that's produced to actually create enough threat for the things that are bigger and badder above it to ignite. And this little bit of separation here, I'm not going to say is always going to do the trick, but reduces our risk. Maintenance is absolutely key. You have to look at irrigation. You have to look at keeping your ground cover short. You have to look at making sure you get all that dead material out of there. Pine straw, obviously in some parts of the country, it's like the prime mulch because it's readily available. You don't have to pay for it. But looking at not using those flammable ground covers and mulches, preferably we would say the first 5 feet. Is that always practical? It is not. So any sort of separation is going to be better than nothing. And of course, getting rid of dead material. Here's a picture from the Lost Pines, where a lot of my pictures are from. We have isolation of landscaping beds. So we have some sidewalks here, as well as some rock borders. We have different levels. Do I wish that this plant maybe wasn't as close to that house? I probably do. Is it irrigated? It is. We have drip lines through here. So generally that plant is going to have a fairly high moisture content. And again, is that owner willing to get rid of it? Probably not. We're going to look at things like creating fuel breaks within the property. Here we have this pathway around, and we have a gravel barrier down here, and it's because there aren't gutters. So they're using it for a backsplash so dirt doesn't go everywhere. So it was done for gutters, but it just pushed all that vegetation a little bit further away. This is a house that actually experienced a fire. This is supposed to be green grass. It was not getting watered because of drought watering restrictions. They were keeping the grass right around the edge of the house a little bit greener. There's also a rock barrier right here. This is vinyl siding. So vinyl is more at risk than other things potentially. But the fire burned through the grass. Embers dropped into this red mulch. But it never got intense enough that it caused any issues. Oh. There's the other view of the pushed back garden. Some more backsplashes. I don't recommend using pea gravel for these because if you go through and try to use your leaf blower, you're just going to throw all those rocks everywhere. So using something a little bit heavier. Your ground covers, we're not going to look at that. We are going to, however, look at this graphic. Who here has seen this graphic before? Who here loves this graphic and would do nothing to ever change it? Right? The people, public find this graphic because it's on the firewise.org website, and it's very, very exact, right? 6 feet distance between trees in the extended zone, 12 feet distance in the, that's still extended zone, 18 feet distance in 5 to 30. National recommendations are for no flammable material to be within the first 5 feet of a structure. Raise your hand if you think that's actually going to happen on our Texas landscapes. Especially when people specifically buy homes or plant trees or are given trees for free from their utility companies because they shade the house, right? But if that tree isn't of a high flammability and if it's being managed around it, I say, the value, and if you're managing your risk to an acceptable level, that is much more practical than presenting graphics like this. This graphic in particular was made to look at continuous, highly flammable vegetation types. So pine, if you have a pine forest, or juniper, if you have a juniper forest, and it's in complete horizontal continuity all the way up to your doorstep, yes, let's look at poking some holes. Let's look at thinning it out a little bit. However, I was on a landscape down in southwest Austin, 100% tree cover from oaks. Per insurance, they're at extremely high risk because they have 100% tree cover. There's nothing underneath those post oaks. There's like little clover growing, right? Because you can't even grow grass. there is no way that those trees are catching on fire unless the structure is already on fire. Which should bring me next to, this concept of pruning up. We saw it actually on one of your slides earlier. A lot of the national graphics are going to show like a 6 to 10 foot pruning height. So looking at reducing your horizontal or your vertical continuity. Reducing vertical continuity is extremely important. And on a lot of our vegetation, it actually would have been done by fires rolling through the landscapes. Junipers would have had a grass fire slam into the edge. It would have singed the lowest few branches. They would have died off. They would have dropped off. Next time fire comes through, those branches aren't there anymore. So by pruning off the lowest branches, we're just doing what fire historically would have done, and that's encouraging the tree to drop its lowest branches and grow up. Now, is it possible for all of our trees to be pruned up 10 feet in the air? Absolutely not. Some of our trees are only 10 feet tall, right? ISA standards say no more than 1/3 of a tree pruned at any one point in time. So do what makes sense. Any separation is better than nothing. Let's look at these pictures. So if you would, can you guys see those at all? Is it too bright? We can see them okay? So if you would, turn to your neighbor for a second and discuss, based off of what you know now about basics of fire behavior and a little bit of from what you know from me about protecting our homes and our structures from wildfire. Turn to a neighbor if you have one, and just what are we seeing here? What do you think made the difference as to whether or not those structures were destroyed or even damaged? I'll give you like 30 seconds to have that conversation. You can talk. About 10 seconds left. Wrap up that conversation. All right. Fabulous. We got to talk to each other. Isn't that nice? If I could have a volunteer, please, for this photo on the left side. I know they're a little hard to tell because we can't go up and look, but what do we think happened? And then I'll tell you what happened. Volunteer, left side. Yes. So she's saying maybe there was a piece of vegetation right in front of this window. I know you guys can't tell. That's a dual paned window. The outside of it cracked. There's a whole bunch of glass down here in the landscaping bed. And you are absolutely correct now that I point them out. So there's the bottom of a bush here, bottom of a bush here, bottom of a bush here, completely consumed. Produced enough heat, probably both through radiant heat and physical contact of flames, that the outside pane of that dual pane window cracked. Anything else happening on that house on the left? Yes, sir. Looks like it's very fire resistant material, right? I don't say proof personally. I say resistant. Proof means 100%. So resistant is going to just decrease risk. That's just a change in terminology, but absolutely correct. We have fiber cement board. We have asphalt shingle roof. Whether it's a fake rock or whether it's real rock, we got fire resistant material on site, right? And then I heard my group up, you guys didn't say it, but I'm going to say it. You guys were talking about the eaves. So if you look right here, you do have plants, maybe even the same type that were up here originally. They are quite brown and crunchy looking, like they got exposed to a decent amount of heat, but they didn't actually consume. Our concern is always creating flames higher and in closer proximity to vulnerable things, right? And what's right on, probably if there's soffit vents here, what's right on the inside of that? the wood, potentially insulation, our attic. So we're pushing heat directly into the attic. I don't want it there. But those bushes didn't consume, so that's good. What about the right side here? Any volunteers for this one? We have what I know is hard to tell, but if you go to the Palmer Lane story map, you'll see these pictures. So this used to be a planted evergreen, and this used to be a planted evergreen. You can see just the tips of the former scale-like leaves on the top of this one here. We have a cedar elm. We have some whatever the heck landscape box shrubs those are, and down here. They were sitting on a mulch bed, and all of the embers that were coming off the burning juniper and all of the embers that were coming off of an entire apartment building that was on fire for hours were just raining down into this neighborhood and landing in all the mulch beds. And Catherine Siebes, our former, we miss her, but she was working for U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and I saw her the next morning, day 2 of Palmer Lane fire, and she said, Kari, we were chasing mulch fires all night long, just going from one mulch pile to the next, because they were all on fire. And if they had a receptive vegetation type, they were igniting it. Now, those bushes had only been planted for a few years. What happens in 5 more years or 10 more years when they're a lot bigger? And now all of a sudden, instead of flame lengths this tall, you have flame lengths this tall. Could my firefighters put those out as easy? Probably not. Right? Everything we do is just looking at decreasing risk, which takes me, these are both Palmer Lane as well, actually. Go look at the story map. I spent a lot of time on it. Okay, that's it for me. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you so much, Kari. That was fantastic. I know you had to cram that into a fractal for us to absorb it today. But again, check out her 2-day Learn-a-Palooza. It's fantastic. Hello, sir. Welcome. We're going to keep it going with Daniel. Shorten it down. Okay. Let's see. Conservation Program Supervisor at Austin Water. Within the Water Conservation Division, he is passionately leading a customer-focused team with a commitment to minimizing water consumption. He and the team provide conservation solutions directly to the community by engaging incentives and rebates, encouraging sustainable practices that resonate throughout Austin. Over 2 decades of experience in the water industry, Daniel's background includes 15 years dedicated to the surface water pollution prevention and 6 years specializing in water conservation. His expertise encompasses strong program leadership, effective team management, seamless customer service, ensuring each community member feels supported and empowered. Daniel holds a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration with a focus on management from Central State University in Ohio. Please welcome Daniel Cavazos.
These introductions make me think that there should be music and confetti and everything else. They're really good. So actually, I want to make this short and sweet. I actually do want to talk to you about drought because we are in drought. We're currently in drought stage 2, and it kind of talks a little bit about what's going on here and kind of keep some things in the back of your mind, especially as we reside, if you live in Austin. Actually, if you live in the Central Texas area, we reside in a climate-challenged area. And so I just want to kind of talk to you a little bit about drought, also discuss a little bit about what we're expecting as we continue in drought conditions, and then cover a little bit of our programs items. So. I think that this is, let me begin with drought stage 2. We're currently in drought stage 2. The slide's not up here. I apologize for that. But in drought stage 2, we've been in drought stage 2 since August of 2023. And, if we had received a memo saying that, hey, when 2025 rolls around, the summer 2025 rolls around, you're still going to be in drought stage 2, I think we would have responded a little bit more differently, but we just don't get that type of update. So predicting drought, whether short-term, long-term, or even emergency situations, is very difficult, and so we try to respond as appropriately as we can. We are currently in drought stage 2, and it appears that we may be going into drought stage 3 at the beginning of August. Now, all of that is dependent. Again, forecasting and predictions, we just don't know. We didn't know we'd be in drought stage 2 for as long as we've been. And when we go into drought stage 3, well, we can only make the best educated guess. Right now, it's a little bit hard to say because we are in, and I'm going to use quotes here, the rainy period. Last week, we actually received a lot of rain, but if you look at the actual rainfall amounts, reservoirs are at 48%. If you look at the rainfall amounts, I think we're actually lower right now than we were at the beginning of the month, even with the rainfall that we've had. And of course, if you follow climate and the climate vernacular and everything else, you're familiar with something called weather weirding. We are deeply within weather weirding. And so last week we had some pretty good rain. This week we're in 100-degree conditions with high winds and other items. So it's really hard to know when we'll hit that threshold for stage 3, but we are anticipating that it's going to be happening sometime in the summer. From all the forecasts and predictions that we've seen, we're only seeing hotter, drier conditions, kind of like what the group here have been talking about, and seeing that the drought is going to be deepening. So what does it mean that we're in drought stage 2? Well, it means automatic irrigation is once per week for 10 hours maximum. We placed some restrictions on drip irrigation, which was new and passed at the same time that the WUI passed as well, where it is actually 20 hours of irrigation using drip, and you can actually water Sundays and Thursdays for even address. And this is for residential, even though we have a lot of other items here, including commercial. Right now I'm talking about residential, and then for odd residential addresses, it's Saturday and Wednesday, and then hose ends 15 hours. What I would recommend is visiting www.waterwiseaustin.org, www.waterwiseaustin.org for our most current watering restriction and drought response efforts. Because again, you're going to hear about this, especially as we're getting closer to the summer. I think in June we're going to start a media launch to kind of warm up the community about drought conditions and the expectation of increased drought. And you'll see and hear a lot of information that's going to come out, and it's going to have information about the watering schedule as well as drought stage 2 and the pending drought stage 3 as well, so that we can kind of it's what's anticipated. It's kind of the direction we're going unless things change. I would be more than happy if I get emails later on that say, hey, you were wrong. We received a whole lot of rain. I would enjoy to have those emails. I really would. But right now, it doesn't look that way. And it looks like, again, we'll be going to drought stage 3. So www.waterwiseaustin.org. Let me also mention one other thing. Hand watering is exempt throughout all of our drought stages. So there's a difference between something called hose end irrigation, where you put a sprinkler at the end of a water hose, you set it out and you let it irrigate, and then something called hand watering, which if you think of someone like me dragging a hose around and then watering, spraying, that's hose end. That's exempt throughout all of our drought restrictions, and you can hand water as much as you like. But there are restrictions on automatic irrigation and hose end irrigation. And we're also going to be looking at some of these things and some of the requirements to make sure that we're lining up with other restrictions as well. Let me mention one other thing. So what does it mean if we were to go into drought stage 3? Well, again, the requirements become a little more restrictive. And in drought stage 3, automatic and drip irrigation are limited to 6 hours max from midnight to 6 a.m. on your assigned weekday. Hose-end irrigation once a week, 6 hours max, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m., 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. on your assigned weekend. But again, there's an exemption for hand watering for all of those items. Again, www.waterwiseaustin.org is the place where I would recommend if you ever have any questions about these items and you want to know what the current watering restrictions are or when your watering time day occurs, visit there and you'll get all of that information. Waterwise landscape rebates, we do have those where you can convert healthy turf grass to native and adaptive plants. Listening to a lot of what's happening here and a lot of the wonderful information that's going on, I think that there's going to be some things that we're going to use, take away from here to help our customers understand, keep these items healthy, make sure that they're maintained, prune them, and kind of taking a lot of the lessons learned here as we implement them into our programs as well. And we are actually taking a really good look at our programs to make sure that, again, all of these items are aligning. For help with native and adaptive plants, you can search the City of Austin's Grow Green Plant Guide. The search should take you to a guide to help select plants that are suitable for the Central Texas region. The information was compiled with the help from Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Services. And I'm going to date myself a little bit here. Back when MS or Microsoft and you would put it on your computer, they had a wizard that would guide you through the process so that you can kind of pick and choose what you need to add or include onto your computer. Well, it's a little bit like a wizard where you can go in and you can kind of choose the area that you want to put your plants, if it's sunny, if it's shaded, the conditions, so they can help choose some of those right plants. It'll give you a menu of appropriate plants that are adaptive to our region, and you can choose those to put them in these areas. So that is also available as well. And I think that is my, so the appropriate plants, we just talked about that. Go to the, search City of Austin Grow Green Plant Guide, and you would be able to find all of that information. growgreen.org is the address that you can just type that in and get the information that you need, as well as the Grow Green Plant Guide. Yes, sir. We were not recommending that because of heat island effects. And the fact that it retain heat, you would run your AC a little bit longer as, okay, all right. But again, that's one of those things where it looks like we may need to do some additional questioning to figure out if it's something that's still acceptable within our region. That's it for me. I will go ahead and let the next person come up. I concede my time on the floor, sir.
Thank you so much. Daniel, everybody. Okay. As we edge closer to the lunch break, I thought we'd go out with an exciting tag team match here. We're going to have Beth versus, no, they're going to team up, actually, is apparently they're on the same team. Okay, so we're going to do that. We've got Beth and Andrew here today. Let's see, Beth is the lead wildland-urban interface plans examiner for the Austin Fire Department. With over 15 years of architectural experience, she also previously served as the building official and assistant director of the City of Austin's Development Services Department. In her current role, Beth oversees WUI code review and implementation. That's all of our life right now. And including development of local amendments to the International Wildland Urban Interface Project Management Wildland-Urban Interface Code. She is a registered architect in Texas and Colorado, certified building official, project management professional, and active member of several professional organizations, including the American Institute of Architects and the Texas Fire Protection Association. And her partner, Drew, works with Andrew Teig, again, Teig like tiger, works for the City of Austin Fire Department as a Plans Examiner B, specializes in wildland urban interface and residential fire protection systems. And he has previously reviewed mechanical systems, energy efficiency, and site planning, and brings a keen eye for detail and deep understanding of building science principles. Please welcome Beth and Andrew.
Thank you. We'll keep this pretty brief, just for interest of time. So we're going to talk more about the Wildland Urban Interface Code, a little bit more specifically about the 2024 code. So we have adopted currently the 2015 Wildland Urban Interface Code with local amendments. This was originally implemented January 1st of 2021, so it's been active for a few years now. And through a lot of the lessons that we have learned from the past few years and from everybody permitting it and building to it, we have made a lot of changes to better organize the code and introduce some new requirements based on research that you've already heard about from the Wildfire division. And so on July 10th, we will be implementing the new 2024 code with amendments. And again, this presentation will be a brief overview of it. I'll hand it over to Andrew in just a second to go more through the site requirements, the ignition-resistant building requirements, and some information about scheduling inspections. And then if you have more interest in it, if you're doing projects in Austin, then I highly encourage you to attend one of our upcoming longer presentations. So if you're an AIA member, you can come to the May 28th meeting at AIA Austin, and we'll have a dedicated presentation just of the code. Wildfire will be there again, as well as the city arborist. And then we'll have the same presentation for the general public if you're not an AIA member on June 9th at 10:30. If you are not already subscribed to the Development Services newsletter, make sure you go to their website. They will be distributing the information about when that will be and how you can register. And those emails should go out on Monday. So make sure that you get registered for their newsletter if you haven't already, and come and hear even more about it if you like what you hear today. So now to Andrew.
All right, thank you, Beth, and all the other amazing announcers, all that. As Beth said, I'll kind of go over all the requirements for plan and plan review, just so I know how many of y'all are designers, drafters, architects, engineers. Is it a majority? Excellent. I know this is kind of a relatively new code, especially if you're from another area. If you have any questions, please just reach out to me, Beth. We'll answer anything we can and direct you to the right sources. So, more to why the rules are the way they are here in Austin. We, as a review team, we don't really focus on defensible space. We focus on structure hardening. A few of the quick reasons: it's more cost effective, lower environmental impact, and again, less need for maintenance, which is a long-term thing that we can't necessarily keep track of. So again, with the city, we're looking at elements that you do to the outside, inside of the buildings and stuff like that. Also, some of those things that I kind of didn't mention are a lot more cost effective. So putting mesh on your vents, hardy board skirting, a lot of these cheaper materials actually are very cost effective fireproofing ways dealing with WUI. Site requirements, there are some site requirements. We do look at that when we check it out, make sure there's no existing, sheds or things like that encroaching on the building and stuff like that. Otherwise, we do require for some of these deeper lots. I know we're going into the home arrow where we're going to see a lot more density, things like that. So some of these deeper lots where you're going to put structures in the back, you should be aware there are site requirements. So you need gate access. If there is a gate, you need gate access, Knox box, things like that. Address markers. We need to identify which structure when our crews get out there to, save somebody. Driveways, we do need turnouts and turnarounds. Our vehicles are big. They are heavy. We do ask for 80,000 pounds for those driveways just to support them. You don't want to be a house where they're not going to come all the way to the back house because you didn't build your driveway right. That would be really, really unfortunate. Water supply is big. Fire flow, especially in the hills around the lake, that can be an issue. You want to have enough to make sure our pumps can actually operate. Public utilities, hydrants, make sure those are in good operating. We do test these because occasionally, especially the private ones, valves foul time to time. Again, you don't want that affecting you. Ignition resistant construction, we look at the WUI in kind of 3 phases or 3 zones. If you're familiar, they used to call them classes. So we had Class A fire protections, and then we had classes for the WUI. That was too confusing, obviously. So now we're going to call them zones when we change. Zones are based on the proximity to the wildland. And there's different requirements based on how that fire affects it. So if you guys have looked at the old map, we've kind of updated it, we've improved it, we've made it more readable, different things like that. You can see kind of a snippet of there on the right. The green actually represents actual wildland. So this could be anything from a complete forest to just undeveloped pasture land that's sat for the last 50 years. And then you see the blue, that's actually where you have active development. That blue is actually zone A and B. And zone A lasts for up to 50 feet. So basically, those are structures that are right up against it and is going to deal with the flame front coming up, maybe catching the side of the house. B is more radiant heat stuff, still has a little bit higher requirements. And then finally, C is that light blue area. That's a majority of our map. I don't know the exact specifics, but maybe around 85–90% of the city that's in the WUI is going to be in C. And again, going back to what David was talking about, over 70% of house fires and structure fires are caused by those embers. So that's the bulk of what we're going to be really trying to prevent. So again, here they are. Zone A, 0 to 50, direct flame, radiant heat, ember protection. Zone B, 50 to 150, radiant heat, ember protection. Zone C, and 150 to 1.5 miles, additional Zone C buffer, and then also ember protection. I will point out it's not clear. So if you are a designer, whether you're an A or B requires you to measure. So if you want to on your thing, go ahead and put a measurement. Hey, our house is actually 120 foot from there. We're not in Class A. And you'll see why, because as they heighten up, that could incur more costs, et cetera. So we do as reviewers check that, but I always, I put it on you guys to tell us what it is. Oh my God. Okay, cool. I'm going to run through these, but the next slide is going to actually have a profile view so we can go through the items. Class A roof protection. Most shingles these days are that, but that's kind of just the baseline. Eave protection, ventilation opening protection, 1/8 inch screening basically. Non-combustible gutters, downspouts, and leaf and debris protection. We do look for leaf guards, so make sure you do put that on your plans or have them. Appendages and structures, decks, balconies, anything hanging off there. Fences, for structures, 10 foot, but in residential, we have a provision for it to be 5 foot. Spark arresters, ember ignition zone, I'll get into that a little bit further. And then finally, ignition source control. So again, here's a great profile view of what I generally like to see. We ask, if you're doing this, make your own WUI independent detail. You can incorporate it, we'll find it. But if you want to make life easy and feel like you're going to get through a lot easier, go ahead and just provide us your own WUI detail. So going into some of the things that you'll see here, Class A or 10-minute ASTM testing. This is different from B and C. The requirement goes up in B and C on that testing to 30 minutes. So just be aware, only C is a 10-minute. So what we're really looking at here, again, the Class A roof, we're no longer allowing vegetative roofs. We did previously, no longer. Underfloor enclosure, pier and beam, different things like that. You need to do skirting, make sure ember's not going to get in it. If you have vents, those have to have 1/8 inch mesh on the louvers. All right, protected eaves, rafter, tails, ceilings. All right, so depending on if you have a porch with a roof, you need to make sure that that ceiling in there and that eave is also going to be fire protected, whether it's like a hardy board or any of the other materials that fit that requirement. Ventilation, I've went over that. 1/8 inch screening should be able to mesh. You should be able to find that. Appendages and structures within 10 feet. So this is a big one. We see this as being a big heartache for a lot of people. If you're building a deck that's an entryway to a house, it has to comply. If that deck is more than 10 feet, you're fine, unless it's over a certain amount of square foot. But generally speaking, anything in within 10 foot needs to be protected. So we're going to look at Class A materials for that. If it's a wood deck, usually something like iPay, so no cedar, none of that is going to be allowed. Or things like TimberTech has a few composite materials, things like that. Fences, again, 10 foot or 5 foot. Spark arresters on things like chimneys. Grills and outdoor kitchens are another big source. If you are doing those will require further protection. So you have to go from, instead of IR, non-combustible. So if it's on a deck, that now has to be like a patio that won't catch fire at all. So something like concrete now. And then the same for the siding. If you were in C and you could normally have like a LP, now it has to be, again, non-combustible. So something like Hardy would work there. So again, that's only when you introduce a kitchen into a structure in Class C. Class B, again, we're kind of ratcheting up some of the stuff. Exposed rafter tails need to be covered. Exterior walls need flashing now. That's a little bit different than it used to be. Appendages and structures within 30 feet. Fences within 10 feet. No soffit vents. I didn't say that, but in C, we do allow soffit vents, but it does have to have the mesh. And B, those are no longer allowed. And then finally, the ember ignition zone. I didn't get into it previously, so I should jump back there. Class C. So if you see on the bottom there, you have the ember ignition zone. New for this 2024 code cycle is that we are going to require that. It's not specifically a WUI code type thing, but it's in the WUI provisions now. So that requires 5 foot protection from the eaves. We do allow in C, grass, but after that, you can only use in B and A things like decorative stone or tile, things like that. Also, we will have plenty of this stuff on the website for you guys to review. So again, all the C requirements count. They sometimes get more stringent, but here they are. The exterior wall flashing is a new one. If you're not doing flashing, you can do non-combustible, and it will work the same. Otherwise, you have to do 6 inches of flashing. No soffit vents. Fences now have to be 10 foot or built out of something, again, non-combustible. And now the ignition ember zone, you're not allowed to do grass or have any ornamental plants. Proximity zone A, this is exactly kind of on the edge of the wildland. This is the interface. So you have trees and all that coming into play with this. Again, the requirements went from 10 to 30 minutes. So again, you might see materials out there labeled WUI, but that's because they might come from California and there's a big program out there, but their requirements are actually a little bit less than ours. So you need to double check those and make sure they met the 30-minute test. We'll go to the next one. So again, what's coming into play here is now your exterior walls. Those need to be fully protected, so you're not going to allow things like cedar or anything like that. You got to have Hardy or another ignition-resistant material, brick, anything like that. Glazing on windows or double pane, that's another big one. Again, I think Kari mentioned it. That really helps if you have a window break and flames get in your house. That's a really big issue. So having those in this area is super important. And then finally, the soffit vents. In B, we require only 1 hour, but also 3/4 inch lumber. Here, it actually becomes 2-inch lumber. We allow FRTW and also, Type X chip. Exterior doors have to meet the exterior door, which is 20 minutes or 1 3/4 inch thick solid core wood. All right. I'll show you a few images of what I kind of see and deal with. It can be confusing what you guys have to deal with or require. So again, spark arrestor up on the chimney, Class A roof. Your ceiling under there needs to be I think they have wood on this one. So that can be a Class B roof. You can have 3/4 inch tongue and groove. Heavy timber for the structure. Heavy timber is 8x8 generally and up. So if you're doing 6x6, check in your heavy timber rules in the IRC. Ignition resistant deck and trim boards. It's really important you go down to the ground in certain areas, especially when you have slope. Otherwise, within 6 inches is actually the code. But I always recommend as close as it makes sense for you. And then there are some things we don't like. Again, these are bad things that we don't want to see. Other things are these railings. Railings are also, so steel railings, I always promote those just because they're easier and cheaper than some of the other alternatives. Fences, this is going to be bigger because materials become more expensive when you deal with fences, but I think when you look at a picture like this, you can really understand the issue. I'm not sure if any of y'all are familiar with the Balch Springs fire. That was a fire up in the Dallas area that basically lawn mowing equipment sparked a grass fire, which sparked the fences to catch fire, and they traveled down the separating fences and just, I don't know how many homes, dozens I think, but I'm not sure on the stats. About 20? Okay. But yeah, anything, just an innocuous mower caused 20 homes to be lost. So anyways, those are kind of some of the main things we look at. The final part of the process is inspections. It is a 2-part process. Why that is because we got to make sure you're doing the things under the eaves right. And then also going back finally to make sure you button it up. Previously, we've only really, on some of the projects, said you need one, but what we've found is it's best to get 2. And what I'm talking about is a deck or something simple where you could kind of bypass that first one, but what we found is it was really important talking about materials. Materials can really sink you, especially things like a deck. You don't want to go out and buy $1,000 worth of lumber and have it not work. So again, we're here. Talk to us, get the testing information from the lumberyard. That's the easiest way to do it. That's the safest way to do it. And finally, here's some links for us, the fire marshal. Our website has a bunch of great links. It recently changed, so please check it out. And then Wildfire Hub as well. Thank you, and I think we are ready for questions too. Are we going to sit in a dais?
Okay, how we doing? We made it halfway. Okay, we've got the team up here, and we want to open it up for questions. We got about 10 minutes, but I got permission. If we have nonstop questions, we can indulge those a little over. So, who's got a question for one of our guests? Yes, Matt. Let me get you a mic.
Help me understand, or help us understand, radiant heat and its role in igniting houses. Like, I see a lot of examples of houses that have, like a wainscot of rock, but then maybe other materials. And I think the general public / me as a builder, we get confused. Like, this house survived, but it has wood siding. How's that possible? How does radiant heat ignite houses? And like, what should we know about that?
Do we have 2 mics? Nope. Yes. Dave, you want, or y'all? Anybody? Rochambeau. Cool.
So radiant heat igniting. So you don't have physical contact. People are tired of hearing me. It depends, right? So, but it's true. So there's a really great video online from some tests up. Some wildfire scientists were testing all sorts of different things, but one of the things they had was just a plain wooden wall at different distances from an entire 200-foot tall pine forest that they lit on fire and tested a whole bunch of different things. And at just 30 feet away in this certain situation from flame lengths that are over 100 feet long, those plain wooden walls did not ignite just from radiant heat. That is, of course, a single situation. So, and I'm not exactly sure what type of wooden planks they were using. That obviously can depend on how long it had been since they had been treated last or anything like that. Most wildland fires, I said it earlier, move through an area fairly quickly when they're burning natural vegetation. Even very, very intense wildland firefighters are not burning for multiple minutes at a time at a single point. They consume and they move on. So you're looking at how much time there's going to be exposure of very high amounts of heat to your exposed non-resilient construction materials, whether it's vinyl or whether it's a wood. Vinyl, of course, will melt. And I shouldn't say all vegetation. I have a slide in my head of the some fires a couple years ago out closer to Abilene, and you had a dead tree stump in the middle of a cattle pen, and it had already lost all of its bark. It had already lost all of its fine limbs. Some embers landed and some decay up top, and it was smoldering for over 12 hours, right? So I'm not saying all vegetative material is going to burn under 30 seconds, but and it melted vinyl off of the side of some bunk housing. But it depends on how long that heat is going to have exposure to vulnerable material. Now, if you have in the wildland-urban interface things like barbecue grills, patio furniture, boats, cars, sheds, those are going to create radiant heat for much longer periods of time than your vegetative material, which then just continue to present vulnerability to your landscape. Is that, I'm not sure how.
When you're talking about like an assembly, you could have a material that might not catch fire, but might be deformed or cause fire impingement because of that. Exactly. So that's where, when you're talking about, okay, there's not direct flame, but now you're exposing materials that aren't as fire resistant underneath it to fire embers, things like that. That's how I always look at it generally.
One thing I found a little surprising just working not in the fire department until about 3 years ago is even just during a house fire, the neighboring property, like the blinds and curtains and things in the adjacent house will start to melt, even though your house is not involved in the fire. So I think what Andrew pointed out with the materials deforming, we see that even just with structure fires outside of wildfire.
Hello. There is I think it was a couple or somebody in the Palisades, I think missed their escape opportunity, and there's a video of them. They have a ridgetop home from their living room, and they have a huge bay window, and you can see the flames shooting up over the ridgeline there and never touching the window, and at some point that whole, you know, it's a big beast of a tempered glass, I don't know how thick, and eventually it just it's a wild thing to see, and that is Radiant Heat 101, that video, so it's probably pretty easy to find. Any other questions? Right here, yes. Oh, go for it.
Is this working? All right. I have a question about Miyawaki urban forest. Is that something that you're familiar with that's happening a lot around like many cities? They're creating these very dense, small oases. So you could look at maybe 5,000 to 10,000 square feet of space, but it's a dense urban forest that's being created. It's called a Miyawaki urban forest. It's been many cities are doing this. How's Austin looking at it? Is this something we want to do? We don't want to do? Do we know about it? It's called a Miyawaki urban forest. It's like a thing.
I'm not familiar with the term. But what I can say is the city of Austin is working to enhance its urban forest, tree canopy coverage, and most of the motivation behind that is heat island effect and groundwater retention and things like that. But I'm not sure some of the details on what you're speaking to, unless what I just said covers it.
So probably no, is what I'm getting. we in the wildfire division are not apprised of it. I believe I've seen something about that, but I can't remember exactly the purpose on that. But it's ringing a bell for me. But yes.
So you have, I mean, all of us up here, you can't see us up here, but we're all like looking at each other like, do you know what that is? Do you know what that is? But what we do have is absolutely the concept of occluded WUI. So when you're talking about wildland-urban interface, you have your classic WUI where a whole bunch of native stuff is in close proximity to traditional landscapes. You have rural WUI where you have larger lots that are intermixed with wildland, and you have occluded WUI, which is when you have natural green spaces completely inside the confines of development. So I'm hearing your description that fits, and obviously Austin has tons of occluded WUI, right? Usually in varying conditions because we've done 150 years of changing how Mother Nature maintains herself. Usually places that we have occluded WUI, just in Texas in general, it's because those areas couldn't be developed. There's water at the bottom. It's really, really steep. So it's areas that are already going to be harder to do green space management work. But it's something, I mean, Austin, I think, has probably the largest budget when it comes to trying to deal with maybe getting some of these urban green spaces back into what natural resource professionals would consider a healthy environment. But there's no magic wand for that. It's a ton of manpower and a ton of money.
And also, just to answer everyone's question, so we were looking it up, but Miyawaki is a type of planting of trees to further your forestation or your urban forest in certain areas. And so just to answer a lot of questions in regards to what is that? What are we talking about?
All right, can you hear me? Yeah. This is probably back for the code review team, but I think this was a bit glossed over on requirements for water supply, so fire flow, like hydrant condition. Does this, I mean, we're familiar, I think, as designers with kind of what with building code and kind of fire flow requirements where we have to order a fire hydrant test and kind of then, based on the pressure results, provide either kind of like fire, like sprinkler or fire pump, or kind of fire sprinkler apparatus for residences. Can you go over a little bit of what these requirements are for the fire flow when it comes to kind of building in WUI zones, especially in developed areas such as, say, Barton Hills, where maybe a lot more, properties have been added to the WUI zone and kind of that have very inconsistent fire flow, or even street to street, kind of the pressures available at the fire hydrants can vary pretty wildly. Is this something that has to be addressed by, Austin Fire as an infrastructure question, or is this something that provides or kind of puts different requirements on the building itself?
The requirements ultimately go on the building itself. We assume that all of the neighborhoods have been designed for at least 1,000 gallons per minute historically, but as the homes have gotten larger, if projects didn't upgrade the infrastructure, which only a large project like a multifamily or something like that would, or a commercial building would need to help upgrade the infrastructure, then your structure can still be built even if it exceeds the available fire flow, but you would have to mitigate it by providing something like fire sprinklers or separating buildings apart instead of, making a duplex or something like that. For the WUI itself, the infrastructure is all through Austin Water, unless you're in an area on the perimeter where maybe it's in Water District 17 or just outside of Austin Water's service area. So there are some parts of Austin that fall under the WUI code but don't have Austin Water, but most of it is Austin Water. So what we do is, historically, you might be more familiar with it with the larger homes that are over 3,600 square feet or any kind of commercial structure that you do have to turn in a hydrant flow test. We might have them on file, so you might not always get the comment if we can find one on file, but if we can't find one, you're going to have to either get a new one or our hydrants group will have to just search for it to see if there is one. So that request should be turned in, but you really should be turning one in every single time. With a WUI project specifically, because we need water both for structure fires and for wildfire events where, as you've seen with like the Palisades fires, like they were running out of water. So we don't really want to be in a situation like that. So fire sprinklers can be helpful in the WUI to counteract low fire flow, but it doesn't do anything for water supply for the community as a whole. So if you have some issues like access issues, which normally if you're in town and not in the WUI, we're going to be more lenient based on the fire code of what we require. But if you are in the WUI, then you really need to be following the fire code to the letter as far as providing water supply. So if you sprinkler it, that helps compensate for low fire flow. Or again, make your buildings just smaller so it works with the fire flow that is available. Provide separate buildings at least 10 feet apart or more. And then there's some other separation allowances that we allow. But otherwise, you might have to do some other mitigation efforts if the other side of water supply is hydrant placement. If there's not a hydrant within 600 feet of your residential structure or within 400 feet of your commercial structure, then you may have to do additional structure hardening beyond what the minimum code is. So again, the code is just a minimum. You can harden beyond what's required by providing all non-combustible finishes, by tempering all of your glass, even your dual pane windows, and just making sure that that structure can kind of weather through the wildfire as much as it can without us having to go and focus on getting the fire off of that structure. And we don't want the structures igniting, especially in those areas, because it just perpetuates the wildfire. So if we can't put it out, then hopefully, as we heard in the earlier presentations, the fire could just pass by with your grass. You've got your ember ignition zone now. And that structure maybe can remain standing without us having to do anything or to get there. Preferably. Yeah, preferably if we don't have to do anything, that'd be great.
This is a slight clarification, but anyone can come to the AA event. There is a little bit of a discount for AA members, but Beth, you can correct me, but it will also be geared a little bit more towards design professionals than the general public presentation as well, correct?
The presentation will be very similar to what the public's getting, but our Q&A we think will be more focused towards design professionals. So we'll spend a little bit more time on the technical part. So if you are a design professional, it'll be a great time to get your questions out versus at the public meeting. It might be more home builders that have more kind of process questions or material questions. But if you have like more in-depth questions about like fire testing and things like that, we can probably dive a bit deeper than we'd be able to in the public presentation. And then any questions you all have will also help inform our public presentation on what people really want to know. But we expect design professionals will have more questions about the ember ignition zone and vegetation and things like that. So we will have the wildfire division and the city arborist there to answer questions about tree pruning and how you should maintain it and all of that. So it'll be similar, but I think the Q&A will really get into what helps the audience more. But I'm glad to hear it's available to everybody.
Oh, yeah.
It's at noon. If you just go to the AIA Austin website, I think you can register there. Or it's on the calendar.
You can go to the calendar, which is the top left, or you can go to EEC, which is the Building and Closure Council. So there's a committee page, and you can sign up there.
Yeah, if you're still not sure, just find Josh after, and he can help you out. And then if I did mention register for the DSD newsletter, that's how you'll find out about our public presentation if you miss that one. And if you miss both of those, we are going to record the presentation ultimately and put in some bookmarks so that you can go back and just visit the section that you need to listen to. And then we will have some new handouts on the website coming soon.
How about this session? Is that what you're saying?
For, I think this is recorded, but for our public presentation, just on the 2024 WUI, which will be like 45 minutes of information, questions and answers, ultimately that will be recorded and on the Wildland-Urban Interface Code website for the fire department so that you can consult with it at any time. And we expect that to live on the website until the next code update several years from now. It's super in depth. Yeah, like I hardly breathe for 45 minutes, so which is why I'm saving my voice today.
Well, back to my confusion. Can you clarify a little bit the different requirements on eve vents in the different zones?
Yeah, so for vents specifically,
Yes.
yeah. So for eve vents, if you're in zone C, which is within 1.5 miles, or we have a new zone within 0.5 mile of the smaller areas of wildland. If you're in that zone C, you're primarily concerned about embers. So we do still need to have vents that have a ember protection mesh. So the 1/8 inch opening is the maximum size you can have on that. The perforated fiber cement soffits that you find, those holes are 3/16, so they're too big. But you can put mesh up against your framing and then put your fiber cement perforated panel kind of under that. So there's also vents that are tested with ember testing, and you can use those too. We have an approved materials list on our website, and we're trying to keep that updated. So when people find new products, we put them on there. So you can find a lot of vents that already are protected and approved. And so you can use those, but then, hardware cloth is less expensive. And then there's some other mesh products also on our approved materials list. I think there's representatives here for that. So there's a lot of different options that you can use. And then once you get into zone B and zone A, where you're much closer to the actual wildland, then you can't have any soffit vents. So all of your roof venting needs to be on top of your roof. Through either ridge vents or just your kind of roof hawk style vents. You can't have anything on the underside. So important to know. If you're doing commercial work though, do keep in mind that there are some ventilation requirements for balconies if you're building them out of wood. So in those cases, you can do an alternate method of compliance and submit something that has a 1-hour rating and meets the ember protection testing through ASTM or UL. But it does have to be that more robust vent. And I think that the vents that meet those requirements are on our list. So that's kind of the one exception. But it would be kind of an alternate method of compliance. It wouldn't be just off the shelf. So we'd have to make sure that we are happy with your whole system, compensating for the fact that you have ventilation on those balconies.
Now, are you saying that closer to a fire, the embers are finer, and so can make it through?
They are not. The embers are still going to make it through the 1/8 inch mesh. There's going to be less embers coming through your 1/8 inch mesh. The risk in zone C is you're still going to have ember issues.
No, I'm concerned about not having eve vents in zones A and B.
Well, you can have roof vents. You just can't have a soffit vent.
Right, but
So your airflow,
in terms of
you would have low vents and you would have high vents. And so if you look at the residential code, it allows that actually that's the standard option, is you provide low vents and high vents. And then it has an exception where you can provide soffit vents.
Ideally, you should have vents at 2 levels so that.
Yes, you're required to have vents at 2
so
levels.
if you have roof vents and you don't have inlet for the air, it just stratifies in.
Yeah, so you're required to have them down low, like toward the eave, but it has to be on top of the roof. And then your other vents need to be up high, like for a sloped roof, have to be up high at the peak. So you would have two zones of venting, and that would compensate for not having the underside vented. It would be just right above it.
Your low vents on top of the roof.
Yeah, your low vents would be on top of the roof. And there's a certain,
Yeah, that's another.
so the houses on Palmer Lane that didn't burn, they didn't have soffit vents. So we've seen evidence of that working. Now, and we did see with like the Balch Springs fire where it was, a grass fire primarily, and that ignited the fences. But you could see, there's videos online that are really kind of great to watch, but you can see some of the houses catching fire in the roof, but the fire's not actually near the house yet. So that's speculated that it was the embers being pulled in through your ventilation. So even those rooftop vents need to have the 1/8 inch mesh, or they need to be designed for that. But residential code does have like what percentage of vents need to be low and which percentage need to be high. as far as your free area goes. So that we don't review that. That's the residential code, which is reviewed by for City of Austin Development Services. So if you do have questions about how much ventilation openings you should provide, definitely check with them. But you will receive comments on your permit applications if we see soffit vents, and you might need to recalculate if you have soffit vents planned. So you might have to recalculate what that means if you're doing the low vents and the high vents, because I think overall it requires kind of more vents that way, which is why we've made this exception for Zone C, which is currently in place under the 2015 code. Is just that Zone C covers a lot of houses and they're far away from the wildland. So our goal is that we'll be able to combat those fires before that structure's a loss a little bit easier than the ones that are right against the wildland. But, it's a risk we take with our firefighters and having to call in people from the state and all of that to help with wildfires.
Nature of fire at the fire front being an A and B rather than C. If you watch the Bald Spring fire, you'll see exactly why we don't allow those vents, because it traveled down the fence and caught them on the eaves.
Yeah, like essentially the Zone A houses were the ones that caught fire, and the Zone C were fine.
Okay, we had some great questions. We're going to have to call it